We will now call the meeting of the Budget and Audit Committee on February 9th, 2021 at 1:30 p.m. Joining me today are Councilmember Hector Sabito, Councilmember Andrea Bearfield, Councilmember Josh Borderood, Councilmember Kelly Palmer, and Councilmember Jim Holmes. On March 16th, 2020, the governor suspended various provisions of the Open Meetings Act pursuant to his state of disaster authority. The change was effective March 16th, 2020 until further notice or until the state of disaster declaration expires. In accordance with physical distancing guidelines and while providing as much transparency as possible, this meeting will not be open to the public. This meeting is being broadcast live at the WCCC.TV. The audio is also being recorded. The video and audio recordings will be available to the public. According to the governor and attorney general, statutes that may require face-to-face interaction between members of the public and public officials are suspended, provided, however, that the governmental body offers alternative methods of communication with their public officials. This includes a public comment on agenda items. In an effort to allow for as much public input as possible, those who wished to submit their written comments on a listed agenda item were asked to submit their comments to the city secretary's office by 11 a.m. today. The city secretary will read into the record the comments submitted for items on the agenda at the appropriate time. And now we will move to the minute of the last meeting. Yes.
Before we begin the minutes, it'd probably be wise to go ahead and call a meeting of the city council.
Oh, did I not?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought I did. Okay, sorry, you're right, I didn't. We'll now call a meeting of the city council on February 9th, 2021 at 1:32 p.m. Are there any changes to the minutes from the last meeting? Hearing none, those will stand approved, and we will move on to our first discussion by Paul Kane, our Assistant City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and good afternoon. It's good to see each one of you today, and thank you for joining us. As you know, Section 14 of the City Charter does require an independent audit to be conducted at the close of each fiscal year. At the close of the fiscal year in September each year about this time, we come to you to discuss the results of the city audit. JRBT has served as Waco's independent auditor since 2005, and joining us today from JRBT are Diana Ward and Katie King. Diana will be giving the presentation today, and following her presentation, Finance Director Janice Andrews will provide council additional information with regard to how we finished up fiscal year 2020 and its effect on our revenues. So at this point, I'll ask Diana to take the reins and present the auditor's information.
Thank you, Paul. Mayor, council members, it's nice to be with you again. As Paul indicated, I get the pleasure of serving as the engagement partner for the city's audit for the firm JRBT. I have with me today Katie King, and that's a slight change. Katie will do the bulk of the presentation because, quite honestly, Katie does all the work. So Katie is the one who knows all the answers, knows all the info, and so she will be leading our discussion today. So Katie, I'll just turn it over to you.
Thanks, Diana. It's good to be with all of you this afternoon. Let me share my screen and we will get right into the presentation. Can y'all see that? Okay, feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions. I'll pause and take some as well because I can't see everybody on my screen, so I don't want to miss. If someone does have a comment, feel free to interrupt. We are here to present the results of the 2020 financial statement audit and the single audit for the year. So we're going to step through these slides on the overall results. We'll start with the single audit and then we'll move into the financial audit. So as a reminder, the single audit is intended for any city or recipient of grant funding who expends more than $750,000 in a given year, federal or state. The city obviously meets those criterion, and so you are required to have a single audit each year. We have listed in the top bullets what constitutes a type A program, which just indicates our risk assessment that we have to perform in determining which programs will be selected for ultimate testing in a given year. This year, based on our risk assessment, the expenditures of the city across federal and state programs, we identified 3 programs for testing. The first 2 are federal. So under the Department of Transportation, we have the Airport Improvement Program. This included both the CARES funding and the non-CARES funding. The CARES funding allowed for certain operational expenditures to be covered. Non-CARES is your standard airport grants that are more the capital expenditures in nature. Secondly, we looked at the U.S. Department of Treasury's grant under the CARES Act. This is what the city utilized to fund public health and public safety payroll amounts during the year as a result of COVID. And then for state programs, we looked at the Texas Anti-Gang Grant, which was granted by the Texas Office of Governor for the year. This is a graph just to show you visually where your expenditures fall under granting authority. Starting in the top left, you have about 43% that is through the Department of Transportation, which is going to include highway planning, airport, transit, all of those funds are in that bucket. The Treasury, which we'll talk about in a minute, is obviously new for the year, so 30% of the funds came from that department, but that is not a routine grant. Housing is 22% of your overall expenditures. The only other one that I wanted to call attention to, because it may look a little odd if it's your first time looking at granting authority, and that is agriculture. That's actually where your WIC programs are funded through. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that.
Hey, Katie, and for comparison, the city receives a total of about $25.6 million in federal funding. So just to give you a base there for the total amount of federal funding that the city receives.
Thank you. In terms of a comparison year over year, this is a graph just to show you by each of those granting authorities what your spend looked like from 2019 to 2020. This graph does include both federal and state expenditures by agency. So just to call attention to a few differences, you can see that your other category increased, but really that is a result of your Texas Anti-Gang Grant for states. So that normally is much lower, but you received $1.2 million in funding from the state for that, which is why you see such a large increase for 2020. Transportation also had an increase. This goes back to the comment I made earlier on airport and the fact that you received both grants for operational expenses and capital expenditures for airport during the year. Transit did receive funding as well, but the way that those worked, even though there was CARES money that was granted, it was kind of a use whichever you want first in terms of the normal grants or the CARES funding. So net increases of what was spent really is attributable primarily to the airport grant. Treasury, you can see, as I mentioned, went from 0 to just under 8 million for the year. So that's obviously from COVID. You can see a slight decrease in the housing funding for the year, which is really a result of the forgiveness of loans from the various HUD programs. So you have more of an expense that is, oh goodness. Wow, gotta love technology. My PowerPoint just crashed. Hang on. Can you still see that, or do I need to reshare my screen?
We can see it. You can, I think, go to the slideshow.
Okay.
Hey, Katie, while you're getting there, can I ask you a quick question about the slide that we were on?
Sure.
Yes. Is this the grants we received this year, or in 2020, I'm sorry, or the grant expenditures?
This is what you've spent.
Okay.
The expenditures, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So where were we? So housing and urban development, again, the decrease there is primarily due to forgiveness of loans, and then there's some offset from additional expenditures during COVID and lead-based paint grant expenditures that have happened throughout the year. Health and Human Services and agriculture remain pretty consistent, so nothing significant there. Overall, for the compliance, and again, for a single audit, we're looking at compliance with the requirements by granting agencies. So our test work here is ensuring that the city is expending the funds in accordance with the grant requirements, in accordance with uniform guidance, or in the case of Treasury, the guidance that they've submitted for following under those CARES relief funds. And so in relation to all of those grant agreements and the overall uniform guidance standards, we were able to issue a clean or unmodified opinion that said that the city did comply in all material respects for each of those major compliance requirements across the 3 grants that we tested. Are there any other questions on the single audit before I move on? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the financial audit results. So this slide we brought to you at planning. So just as a refresher, these are the opinion units that our opinion is based upon. And so as we do our testing, it's largely grouped into these major account groups. You'll have the governmental and business type activities, which look at the city as a whole. And then we have the major funds, general, water, wastewater, solid waste. And then we have all the other remaining funds that fall into the lower bucket. And we also have the discretely presented component units, which you see on the face of the government-wide financial statements in a separate column. I'm going to skip real quick out of the PowerPoint and address a separate letter that you received in your packet. That is a letter we are required to provide to you as the governance for the city of Waco. And so I just want to hit some high points here. This would have been in your packet, but essentially we're required to communicate a handful of matters to you as those in charge of governance. This first section just talks about the fact that we've substantially completed our audit. We do plan to issue our opinions on those here next week. We'll talk about the timing in a minute, excuse me, this week. We'll talk about that more in a minute. We want to communicate a few significant audit matters to you. Number one, the city management is responsible for identifying and implementing their accounting policies. And year over year, there was no change in the accounting policies that were adopted, which just means the financials that you're looking at are comparable year to year. There was nothing new that was implemented in 2020 that would not have been similar in 2019. Down here at the bottom of this first page, we talk about some accounting estimates. So in any set of financial statements, you're likely to have items that are estimates that have underlying assumptions. Our test work includes looking at those underlying assumptions to make sure those estimates are reasonable, but it is management's responsibility to develop those estimates and present those in the financial statements. We've listed the most significant ones for you at the bottom of page 1. Items such as estimates for liabilities and claims and judgments, landfill post-closure costs, self-funded health insurance, the net pension and OPEB liabilities, which we'll talk more about in a little bit, allowances for doubtful accounts, and useful lives of depreciation. We also, on page 2, identify some of the significant disclosures that you'll find throughout the CAFR, including the termination of the WMARS agreement, which we'll talk about, and then reporting for pensions and OPEB as well. We're required to report to you if we have any disagreements with management or encounter any difficulties in the audit, and we, of course, had none. I think you know your city staff is nothing but cooperative and a pleasure to deal with. They provide everything that we need, and so we appreciate that and can communicate that to you with confidence. We also have to communicate any corrected or uncorrected misstatements. So should we identify any items in the financials that are material in nature that need to be reflected in the financial statements, we would present those to you. We also show you, out of transparency, any items that we identify that we determine are not material and do not need to be reflected in the CAFR. So I'll show you that schedule in a minute of which ones of those we identified that were not reflected in the financial statements you have before you. We also receive a letter from management called a representation letter. It's attached to this right now. Just communicating they've provided everything that we need and have left nothing out. They've been cooperative with everything, and so they sign that as part of the audit as well. We would let you know if there were any consultations with other auditors, of which we are not aware of any. And then ultimately, this other matters section just tells you our responsibility as it relates to the various parts of the CAFR, because certain parts like the introduction, management's discussion and analysis, we don't opine on any of that. We look at things for reasonableness, but we have no responsibility to report on those. So this last paragraph just gives you some insight into that difference of responsibility. I'm going to jump to the bottom of this letter on page 13, and you will see one of 2 past audit adjustments. These are the ones that are not reflected in the CAFR, but for transparency's sake, we present them to you. The first is an item that we have each year, and it relates to the deferred inflows of resources. Essentially, the city has the ability to count as revenue those court fines that they receive up to 60 days following year end. That's something that's not recorded by the city, but it's not material, but it is shown here for you. And then the second one related to an item we identified in the airport fund where there was a project that should have been written off. It was sitting in work in process, but again, it was not material to the overall financial statements for it to be recorded. The third statement is the same as the one above, but it just takes total business type instead of just the airport fund. So I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint presentation unless anyone has a question on that letter or the schedule. Okay, we're still seeing the screen okay? Okay. So moving on, wanted to just touch on a few notable accounting matters for the year. We mentioned in the disclosure comment a minute ago that there was the termination of the WMARS agreement in 2020. This included a conveyance of the overall WMARS assets from your participating cities to the city of Waco. Waco refunded some monies back to the cities in cash, and then it netted what we call a special item gain on the financial statements of $29.8 million there. So there is a footnote in the CAFR discussing this more completely, but this was effective October 1st, 2019. Secondly, we had a debt issuance back in February, certificates of obligation. You can see the numbers there, almost 60 million of an issuance. And then just for your benefit to know, those four breakdowns of those opinion units we talked about earlier are how that money was split among the various funds. So it went between general government, water, wastewater, and WMARS, which the city tracks separately internally, but WMARS ultimately rolls into the wastewater financial statements as presented in the CAFR. For pension and OPEB, so as a reminder, the pension liability is administered through the Texas Municipal Retirement System. So it is administered by the state of Texas, and the city of Waco has little to no ownership over the actual management of this fund. But this is a pension fund that the city participates in. It has assets that offset the liability that's attributed to the city each year, and so you see large swings year over year in what this liability looks like based on the return of the underlying assets. This particular liability is measured on December 31st of each year, so there is a time lag between the measurement date and the city's fiscal year end of September 30th, 2020. And so for the calendar year in 2019 on which this measurement was based, we actually had a decrease in the liability to $53 million at the end of 2020. Which was a decrease of $33 million for the year. That liability also is split among water, wastewater, solid waste, and the general government activities of the city. And then OPEB liability. So this is your city's retirement life insurance plan for retirees. So a lot of OPEB liabilities include health insurance. This one does not. It is strictly the $2,500 life insurance policy for retirees. This plan has a measurement date as well of December 31st, but it has no assets in the plan. And so any changes here are the result of changes in underlying actuarial assumptions, which the city has valued every other year. So this was a year of a full valuation, and the change you can see was an increase to $1.9 million, which was about a $400,000 change for the year. Overall, for the city this year, we would report to you if we had identified any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal controls over financial reporting. So these are the controls we've mentioned before that are not overall, there's not an opinion on the effectiveness for the city, but we do report any findings that we have if we come across such items that would allow a material misstatement to get through the financial statements, and we're pleased to tell you we had no such findings to report. We had test work performed by a third-party contractor that we utilize over the city's information technology general controls, and there were similarly no findings to report from his work on the city's IT. We also do, as part of test work from a government standpoint, we do what's called yellow book testing, which is compliance over things such as Public Funds Investment Act, procurement standards, et cetera. And if there were any control findings there, we would report those to you. There were none for 2020. And then we also have a separate report that we issue over the passenger facility charge. That's the PFC compliance at the airport. that has certain requirements over how those funds are allowed to be utilized based on FAA regulations. We've issued that report with also no findings. And then finally, our audit opinion for the overall financial statements is a clean or unmodified opinion. What that means is that there were no material misstatements in the financials that we need to report to you. Just for a frame of reference, an opinion could be different under a couple of scenarios. Number one, if there was what we call a scope limitation, meaning if management did not provide something that we needed or withheld certain information, which we've already communicated to you. We had no such issues and they represented that to us as well. But a scope limitation could be a reason for a different opinion. A second reason could be if there were material misstatements that we identified and management decided not to book, which again, we've already told you that didn't happen either for the year. Those would be two reasons that you might have a modified opinion. But in this case, it was, we're pleased to report an unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion saying that everything is fairly presented as of and for the year end September 30th, 2020. So where we go from here, you have a draft CAFR that was in your packet to review. If there are no comments or changes to that, we plan to issue the final version of the CAFR and all of the related reports on Thursday of this week. And then we will follow that with a presentation to the formal council on February the 16th, where we will wrap this up with a bow. After that, that's the last of our prepared comments. I don't know if you have any further questions for us.
Any questions?
This is Holmes. No questions. Just appreciate the presentation. Katie and Diana. Looks like a clean opinion. No material deficiencies, no findings. All looks great. I appreciate.
Jim, hey, I don't want to cut you off here, Jim, but I'm hearing an echo. So maybe if everyone can make sure you're muted, that'd probably be helpful.
Can you hear me now?
All good.
Who is the guilty culprit there? All right. Okay. Yeah, great audit, JRBT. Appreciate it, Diane and Katie. Good work. No material deficiencies. Obviously, no findings. Clean. And the additional testing you did this year on the grant funding and some of the operational deals, very good. I'm glad to hear on the internal controls and the IT and the other compliance. Appreciate the extra work you did there. But it looks good. We're getting into the financials after this, right? Are you guys done? And Janice gets on the line. Or are you guys going to go over the financial statements also?
We're done. Janice is next. The one up.
Okay.
She's going to give you all the good news.
All right. Good. No, thanks, Katie and Diane. Appreciate you guys.
Good afternoon. I just want to echo Councilmember Holmes. You know, this is the third audit I think I've been with through the city, and it's always good to hear that the city has done a great job in making sure that we are being responsible. And Katie and Diana, thank you for all of your work. I know it's very time consuming, especially this year with so much more CARES funding. You know, I know it played a tricky part in as you were doing the audit, but I appreciate your tenacity. And of course, big kudos to Paul Kane and Janice Andrews and their departments for just providing all of the information. I mean, we hear nothing but raving reviews on our finance department, and it just goes to show you what good hands we're in. And so thank you to city staff for all of your work on this.
I wanted to add, it is a huge team effort from a lot of folks in the city, and we certainly could not do it without the hard work that the auditors do with us as we work through this. I did want to add one thing. It's something we don't talk a lot about when Katie mentioned the OPEB, and we do provide that small life insurance policy, and she also mentioned a lot of cities do health insurance. We got some information from our actuarial just on what position that puts us into. And our OPEB liability, one measurement is we're about 2.2% of our covered payroll. The median for about 81 other Texas cities that they performed this study for is over 20%. So we are in excellent financial position by not having that health insurance liability, and that would make a huge difference in the liability that we would have to report for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Janice. And I just wanted to join the council in thanking Diana and Katie and her team, as well as Janice and her team upstairs, for all the great work they did. Certainly COVID-19 brought a lot of challenges, both professionally and even personally, to the staff throughout the process. So appreciate all the great work that the team did.
Thank you. If you're ready now, if there's no more questions of the auditors, I was going to talk a little bit about the financial statements, and let me make sure. I think I'm sharing the wrong one. Did that work?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm really going to focus a little bit on two areas. One is our financial management policy statements. Those are an important tool for us. They're central to our management of the different decisions that we have to make. We periodically bring back revisions to those, but those guide us in our reserve requirements. And there are different reserve requirements depending on the type of funds you're working with. And we'll sort of go through that today. The other area I wanted to focus on is we did a pretty in-depth review of general fund in December. And we've actually got a positive story to tell. We've actually increased our addition to fund balance since that meeting. And I just sort of wanted to walk that forward so that you would see what we had done. We're going to be talking about general fund. As Katie mentioned, that's a type of governmental fund. It uses a modified accrual, more on current resources. We don't have the capital assets in that fund, such as our equipment, our buildings. We don't have long-term debt in that fund. And so the way we measure that reserve is with the fund balance, which is the difference in our assets and liabilities. We'll also be looking at our three big utility funds, which are a proprietary type business type fund, more like a private sector type fund. And they really have those capital assets and they have the long-term debt. So the presentation is different. Those three are enterprise funds under proprietary fund umbrella. And then we have the two of our internal service funds that also have some reserve requirements, our insurance fund and our health insurance that we'll be talking about. The classifications of fund balance for general fund are non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned. Have different criteria for those. We really have focused our financial management policies on the unassigned, and we've done a lot of different things with assignments through the years and utilized those to do some really critical capital projects. And we're looking to sort of do a revision to focus more on our unassigned, putting that in a good stable position and utilizing those assignments as needed for different areas. We did have adjustments for the year-end audit since we talked to you in December. We actually have a very positive addition of almost 1.2 million to our general fund balance. I want to show you what that did to the different fund balance classifications and also what it did to assignments for capital improvements. That adjustment was primarily due to the CARES Treasury grant. I think when we talked to you, we told you that we had set aside an allowance because we weren't sure we were going to receive all of those funds. So we'd set aside over $1 million, about a 15% allowance out of that $7.6 million grant. Fortunately, we received all the money. We received it in December, so we were able to record all of that. General fund recorded the bulk of that, about 7.4 million, and that was for salary and benefits for police patrol and fire communication reimbursement. We had a lot of other expenditures that would have qualified, but again, we worked within our grant and tried to do our request for reimbursement in the most efficient way by focusing on those areas. We had another small amount that went into our health fund, which was for health administration and health environmental salaries and benefits. This is what we presented to you in December, and it was primarily a comparison between the prior year and this year and the different changes. And you can see at that time at the bottom, our total had gone up about 3.6 million in fund balance. And you can see the decreases in our assignments, and you can also see where we had done the focus to do our unassigned to go up about $17 million as compared. Walking forward to what you're getting in your CAFR this year, your draft report, that huge document that was in your agenda, you're seeing that we actually closed the year higher, and we actually ended up booking over $4 million to our fund balance, almost 4.8 million. When you pick up what we had previously showed you in December. The major changes is we added all of that to capital improvements, assignments. Again, that assignment is intended use. We have to come back to the council to do the actual appropriation for that. And we won't actually do anything with that until we get council's approval. Same thing on economic development. That's intended use also. You'll see we did a little bit of reclassification between other and public safety, culture and rec, and public works. All of that is related to the purchase orders that had the commitments had been made in 20, but we weren't finished with either receiving the products or the services. So those will roll into 21. We will do a budget amendment for those. That was about 2.1 million. And for the audit, we actually have to reclass that to the appropriate functions of that. We also have a subsequent year budget, and that was actually planned utilization of fund balance of about 7.9 million. And that is actually included in the 21 budget. And we've got the set aside here to provide that funding for it. This is the change I wanted you to see in the general fund assignments for capital. We added that initially into the capital projects reserve funding bucket. Again, these will have to come back for formal approval. We do plan to have some additional discussion on assignments at our March budget and audit committee meeting, so you can see how we ended the year and have a discussion on how best to utilize these going forward. The unassigned fund balance policy was amended this year to change from measuring against expenditures. We now have it at 28% of current year budgeted revenues. We closed the year in a strong position, and we actually are at 33%. That will put us in a strong position going forward. Gives us a really stable reserve there to have available as needed. I wanted to talk a little bit about the other reserve categories. And when we get into the enterprise funds, really fund balance is not how you measure that, because you have those more long-term assets and liabilities in there. The difference between those, instead of being called fund balance, is net position. And you really want to look at what's liquid. So working capital is really a good measure to look at what kind of reserve levels you need for those funds. And we have a policy, the minimum working capital, and again, that's current assets less current liabilities, should be 30% of annual revenues. And some of the larger liabilities that are in those funds is the next year's principal payment. That meets the criteria to be classified as a current asset. So you want to make sure you've got enough working capital to cover those. The way we closed 2020 on our financials, you can see all of the funds exceeded that. Water at over 62%, wastewater at 74%, solid waste at almost 65%. We take a little bit more conservative approach with what we talk to the rating agencies with. Our cash CIP does not meet the criteria to be classified as a restricted type asset for the audit, but we make an adjustment for that and then calculate that working capital ratio again. And you can see it goes down slightly, but we feel like that's more conservative because the funds for cash CIP are really planned to be used for capital. They're not really considered to be liquid to be utilized for other things. So when we do that, it brings water down to 51.5, wastewater at 52.2, and solid waste to 48.8. Again, closing the year in a strong position and really providing that type of reserve requirement that we need for those funds. The last area I want to talk about is internal service funds. Those are a type of proprietary funds, but because they don't have the customer assets like a utility fund, the customer receivables, we really look at their reserve requirements more just on cash, not on the working capital. So we're looking at a cash reserve, and we want it to be sufficient to fund current liabilities, which include the claims, the estimated claims, plus 20% of their annual budgeted operating expenses. And you can see that the insurance fund, which is where we account for risk management and insurance activities, met that policy requirement, and in fact, with an excess of 6.1 million. We've got a budgeted transfer back to the operating funds of 2.4 million in fiscal year 21, but still leaves that fund in a strong position for any potential contingencies that we may need in the future. The health insurance fund also closed in a positive position, met that reserve requirement, exceeded it with 1.3 million. We had a small budgeted 21 utilization of reserves, but still leaves that fund in a strong position. So all in all, the funds, even with COVID, closed in a strong position. We met our reserve requirements and certainly ended the year on a positive note to go forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Janice. Does anybody have any questions?
Mayor, no questions, but man, what great news that we are receiving in spite of the year of COVID-19 in 2020, that we are ending the year this strong. I mean, it's nothing but great news. And I know I sound like a broken record, but man, kudos to our staff and our finance department who are just so creative and so diligent in making sure that every dollar is spent equitably and we're being financially responsible. And so thank you, Janice, for the presentation, and kudos to you and your department for a great report. This is and I think this is unheard of, the way cities are ending 2020, and for us to end like this, it's just nothing but great news. So thank you.
Thank you.
This is Holmes. Just a couple of comments on the presentation on the slides. So we going back to the slide that showed the 1,179,000 increase in reserve. It seems like our reserves are in pretty good shape, kind of across the board, really. And I think on that amount, the 1,179,000 going back into CIP, it makes a lot of sense because that's so dynamic. As I think about the slide that shows us with 48 million in unassigned at 33%, and really our target's 28%, which is 40 million and 40.7 million. As we think about that 7 million cushion, and I think maybe it's on this council to be thinking about how do we keep that as additional reserve unassigned? Do we think about bleeding that back into CIP, tax relief, economic development? There's a lot of different things that would benefit the city, but I think we need to be thoughtful about, this balance sheet's in great shape, but I just want to make sure there's not, extra liquidity that we're not utilizing for the benefit of the taxpayers. The other question I had on the CARES, the 7.4, is that is just targeted to the police, patrol, and fire communications, and a little bit there for health administration. And is that a pretty tight definition on how we use those within those three groups, or how much latitude is there in using that CARES funding?
Well, actually, we had a lot of expenses that would have qualified for CARES that we were tracking. But due to trying to come up with the most efficient way to request that reimbursement, we focused on requesting reimbursement for those particular divisions and departments. There would have been a lot of other expenses, and that revenue just went back into the general fund. And that was certainly an important factor in allowing us to increase our fund balance in the general fund, is by having that additional grant revenue. coming in. But there would have been certainly other areas, other funds that could have benefited, but a lot of it was too dependent on what was the most efficient method of administration to request that reimbursement. And there were a lot of, we worked with BKD to get that, and there were a lot of hours in just assembling that information and that backup. And if you go to other type of expenses, then there's even more administration with producing the invoices. There's just a lot of backup and information you have to provide in order to receive that reimbursement. And we actually did our reimbursement request for more than our allotment so that we would have some cushion if something was found not to be eligible.
Dennis, if I could, would you mind going to the capital assignment slide? And sorry, Council, I should have noted this earlier during the presentation. The line titled Capital Projects Reserve Funding, you'll see that that amount is $8.3 million. And in previous discussions with the council, we had talked about as we exceeded that the goals for our undesignated fund balance, that we would transfer that money out into a separate fund, so there's no longer part of the fund balance, but available for council to utilize on your priorities for the city. So you'll see that 8.3 million there. We'll have significant discussion about that at the March 9th budget and audit meeting. And essentially that 8.3 is available for council to direct staff to spend on capital items. We would strongly recommend that council choose to spend those dollars on one-time non-recurring expenses. And those can be your pleasure, but we want to make sure that any obligations or any use of those funds don't obligate future revenues, future budgets. So those would be ideal for those one-time expenses. So as we move into the March 9th, I believe it is, budget and audit meeting, we'll be talking to you at length about that 8.3 and how council wishes to direct those funds.
And yes, if I might add too, Paul, in the subsequent year's budget, out of that 7.9 million, there is a transfer already budgeted in fiscal year 21 to go to that of over 3 million in addition. So we've got a strong amount of money to be available for capital needs that the council sees fit. And again, all of these are intended uses. They do have to come back for formal appropriation.
Hey, Paul, this is Hector. Will those one-time expenses include economic development and maybe WebEC money?
They could. Essentially, we would encourage the council to avoid anything that would obligate future budgets. So a one-time contribution to WebMec, a one-time contribution to a specific program that the council might want to start, a one-time expense for a capital purchase certainly would be an option for those dollars as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
And back to Holmes here. I wanted to go through the financials that y'all put together or that were audited just briefly, just hit some highlights. I guess this is the time because we're moving on to another topic after this, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Just page 11 of the report, the 300 and some page report. It's so impressive. Critical mass here at 1.4 billion in assets that we're working with now. And I know when I got on council several years ago, it was under $1 billion. So crossing over that barrier, I thought is impressive. The second thing on that page 11 is the debt. Actually, I think we're very thoughtful on this council of how we treat leverage, and we're careful about how we price it. We've had some very good pricing in our debt instruments and our COs. So I think that serves us well. Flipping over to page 14, I thought this was an interesting little graph here. And I just want to kind of hammer home the main revenues that we look at every year are, it's right there. The taxes, the water service charges are the big number, but that sales tax, that 41 million, And this time last year, well, maybe 10 months ago, we were looking at that number possibly going down by $10 million in our budget. And, thank goodness for the resiliency of Waco's small businesses and how we kind of went through COVID and our businesses in Waco kind of continued to battle through the pandemic and get those sales and get that number back to where close to, I think, right where we budgeted it. But anyway, that was a number that was kind of freaking everybody out last year as far as meeting budget and kind of going into triage on how we were going to make it. But to me, that was a nice little graph. Going to page really 19, I guess. And again, this also goes to the debt that we're the COs that we put on, and just the low rates and how now I think we're not loading up the balance sheet with debt, but we are being thoughtful about how we use it and locking in some all-time low rates, which I think benefits the city in the long run here. I think I talked about all this when the preliminary year FYE was done and when the internal FYE was done, and now the audit. I'll talk about it one last time here. Major enterprise funds seem to be in good shape. Certainly on page 187, the water fund, wastewater, and solid waste. I think we're leaving these in good shape. And as Janice mentioned, the fund balances are in pretty strong shape on all of them. We've got a lot of capital projects within each of these that are to the longer term benefit of the city, I'll say. So I'm happy to see those in great shape. And then flipping to 207, the non-major enterprise funds, where you kind of go down them one by one, the airport fund, and we'll get some CARES help there. And Joel is doing a great job out there in the airport management. Convention Services Fund, we did some governance construct changes there, and Todd's doing a great job in a very difficult time here on the convention services and figuring out how we come back from the pandemic. Ranger Hall of Fame, Byron Johnson continues to amaze me. I mean, he went through the COVID crisis, he went through the closing down I-35 crisis, and he continues to get good attendance there at the Ranger Hall. Cameron Park Zoo, new management there too. And again, I'm very excited about all of these non-major enterprise funds as we get past the pandemic and position ourselves for growth. Let me see. Let me just flip. And really interesting for everybody, for the viewing audience at home, going back to page 289, really cool demographic and economic statistics in this report that kind of show Waco's 10-year, rolling history of population, how we're growing, why our budget is growing a little bit, because we're getting bigger. We have more needs. We don't have a bigger budget just for bigger budget's sake. Per capita personal income continues to go up. We still have some work to do there. Unemployment rate, as you can see, we were all the way down to 3.1% last year before COVID, back up to 5.3 as of this test date. We just have some work there to do. And as we get out of the pandemic, I think we'll be in good shape. And then finally, really looking back at page 293 on full-time equivalents for the city. I think we've been very thoughtful and very efficient because we've only had really fractional growth in employee count at the city in the last 5-6 years. And I want to just, Bradley, you and your team have done a great job in trying to find ways to be efficient for the taxpayers' sake and doing more with the same number of folks. So those are my brief comments on the 2020 year. But congratulations, everybody! It looks like a great year. We left ourselves in better position than when we started. That's all I've got, Mayor.
Thanks, Council Member.
I would like to second all of Jim's comments today, and that's all I've got to say.
Thanks, Josh. Anyone else?
Mayor, real quick.
No. Yep.
Paul, can you verify that you said we're going to look at the surplus that we have in the general fund at some point in a future budget and audit committee. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, March 9th.
Okay,
We'll
awesome.
have a detailed discussion with you about the use of those surplus funds.
Perfect. Looking forward to that.
And in the meantime, we certainly welcome both city manager and I welcome your comments and suggestions. If you have anything you'd like to give us ahead of that meeting so that we can be prepared, we welcome those as well.
I just want to say how much I appreciate Janice and Paul and your entire team, JRBT as well, your efforts. This has been a challenging year where there's a lot of uncertainty and rest that required a lot of strategic planning and thoughtfulness in this approach, and to find ourselves in a positive situation is something that I think we can be proud of. And it's important that as we're juggling challenges and capitalizing on opportunities, that our budget is in good shape, and knowing that that is part of the culture in the city of Waco is something that I think we take advantage of or take for granted, that there aren't greater challenges or problems that we have been facing from the administration and good work that has gone into building out this great budget. So thanks for your efforts, team. It doesn't go unnoticed. This council is very grateful for this good work and look forward to the more in-depth conversations in the days ahead on some of the on what to do with that surplus as well. So thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
And Janice.
Thank you.
All right. Is that all for that one, Paul? That item?
Yes, sir, it is.
Next, we'll have a discussion on our health insurance plan. Missy Pachowski, our Human Resource Director, and Morgan Young from Holmes Murphy will be joining us to make a presentation remotely.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. It's good to be with you. I'm Missy Pachowski. I'm the HR Director for the City of Waco, and I'm joined here today by Morgan Young, who's with Holmes Murphy and Associates. Holmes Murphy is the city's benefits consultant, and one of the responsibilities of the Human Resources Department is the oversight and administration of the city's employee health plan. Today, we'll be talking to you about kind of the recent history of the health plan over the last couple of years, going to share some employee survey results with you, and then we're going to talk about cost projections going forward. At the city, one of our values is invest in people. One of our biggest ways we invest in our employees is through the health plan. We work to craft a plan that aligns with the city's vision of creating a workplace where everyone belongs and thrives while moving forward together. Every year, we continue to innovate and find new ways to engage our employees on their health journey. Our goal is to offer employees and their dependents an affordable health plan from a benefit and cost perspective that offers them a choice of where to go for care as well. The city hired Holmes Murphy to provide their expertise on actuarial, medical, and pharmacy projections to help build a sustainable health plan and to provide overall knowledge and compliance in the healthcare and pharmacy sectors. The city's health plan runs on a fiscal year, so it's from October 1st to September 30th. We go out to bid every 3 to 5 years for our third-party administrative services. And in 2019 was the last time we completed an RFP for our third-party administrative services, and we decided to continue utilizing Blue Cross Blue Shield. During this time, the city was experiencing rapidly increasing claims and an increase to our high-cost claimants. The city's consultant, Holmes Murphy, shared that additional options existed outside the standard Blue Cross Blue Shield relationship that could yield city savings. In 2019, the city had several meetings with our local healthcare partners to build an understanding of any potential solutions they may have to curb the city's rising healthcare costs and to continue to offer choice and best-in-class benefits to our employees. Prior to making any changes, we surveyed our employees at this time. We asked our employees what's most important, provider choice, our healthcare, cost of healthcare. And the results came back 50-50. 50% of our employees thought provider choice was most important, and 50% of our employees thought the cost of healthcare making sure we provided affordable care was most important. So keeping the survey results in the back of our mind, Holmes Murphy aggregated all the results and proposals that we received from our hospital systems and the physician groups, and these options were presented to the council. In that presentation, the offers range from making no changes to aligning with the particular physician group that would work to manage the health of our population. And on the extreme end, there was an option to eliminate a hospital system from the city's network. The council supported our recommendation to create a health plan design alignment with the Baylor Scott and White Quality Alliance. This proposal offered the city a discount on hospital services, allowed the city to maintain access to all hospitals and physicians in our network, and provided employees with an option to see primary care physicians at no cost. Overall, this option has allowed the city to maintain their current city contributions and not to increase employee premiums for the past 2 years. And we continue to see positive claim trend as a result of this change. Since making the change in 2019, the Human Resources team has received overall positive feedback on the changes that were made. Anytime that changes are made, our team has a good pulse on the impact to employees based on the amount of questions and feedback our team receives. In order to validate our employees, how employees felt about the health plan, we recently completed a brief survey about the health plan. We have 1,385 employees enrolled on our health plan. And when you add dependents to that number, just to get an idea of how many lives are on our health plan, we have 2,749 lives on our health plan. So we have almost as many dependents as employees on the health plan. 725 of our employees on the plan, 52% completed this brief survey that we recently sent out. So the next couple of slides are going to cover some survey results. So 79% of the employees that responded believe the city's health plan provides a choice of where to go for care. 78% of employees that responded believe the city's health plan provides access to the physicians and hospitals that they prefer. When asked in the past 12 months, did you visit a Baylor Scott and White physician in person or over the phone? 74 responded yes, and of those that responded yes, 68% said the benefit design was a key reason for that visit. And then finally, 80% of our employees responded confirmed they did not change their primary care physician in the past 12 months simply because the city's plan had certain physicians available at no cost. This confirms that employees who value choice continue to feel that they have the option to go to any physician on the plan. Additionally, through reporting from our consultant, the data shows 55% of our employees use Baylor Scott and White primary care physicians, while the remaining percent of employees use other providers. So at this time, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Morgan Young with Holmes Murphy.
Perfect. Good afternoon. So my name is Morgan Young. I'm with Holmes Murphy. We are the city's benefit consultant, and I just wanted to start out this presentation by showing council the current benefits that the city offers to employees and their dependents. And so at a very high level, we just wanted to review the deductibles and the out-of-pockets. So from a city perspective, anytime that a deductible would apply, that takes place anytime that a person goes inpatient for care or has any outpatient surgery. So from an individual basis, their deductible would be $1,500. And then after that, the plan would pay 80% of the rest of that cost, and then the employee would pay the other 20%. From a family perspective, that deductible is $3,000. So it could be an accumulation of any one or several people in the family that meets that $3,000. And once those totals have been met, they've then satisfied that deductible for the year. Any amounts that employees or their families spend on that deductible goes into that next category called an out-of-pocket maximum. I like to think of this as your total exposure in the year, your worst case scenario. So from an individual basis, the most that an employee would spend for medical and pharmacy care in a year would be $4,500. From a family perspective, it would be $9,000. Holmes Murphy works with several cities throughout the state, And we benchmark these benefits across several peer cities for Waco. And I can tell you these are very competitive benefits. As Missy mentioned before, we are with Blue Cross Blue Shield, which has a very broad network. And then Missy, if you want to go to the next slide, we'll give you a couple of other highlights from the city's plan. What this is looking at is, the last slide really focused on if folks go inpatient for care or have to have an outpatient surgery. This really focuses on folks that are getting any type of preventive care, if folks need to go in and see a primary care physician, or if they need to see a specialist. So anytime that an individual goes in for primary care, regardless of where they go for that care, it will always be covered at 100% by the plan. There's no cost shared from an employee perspective. It's always covered. One thing that we did change in 2019, I know Missy had referenced the surveys that we had done and the diligence that we had done in meeting with the health systems and the physician practices. That change that we did make to our plan design in 2019 was to offer an option to individuals. And so if they choose to go to a Baylor, Scott & White or Hillcrest provider, they can do so at no cost. So it's no cost to either them or any family member that they have on the plan. If they don't want to go to a Baylor, Scott & White physician, they still have that choice. So one of the things that was very key when we were creating a plan design was not only to focus on cost efficiency, but to still retain that choice in the plan. So any primary care physician outside of Baylor, Scott & White that would still be available in the Blue Cross network would be available to individuals at a $50 copay. And just as a reminder, I know everybody doesn't live in healthcare like I do. A copay is the amount that you pay at the time of the visit, and that's your only responsibility. Any other costs that are incurred during that physician visit would be paid at 100% by the plan. And then from a specialist basis, there is no differentiation when individuals go see a specialist. So it doesn't matter if it's a Baylor physician or any other physician, that's always available to individuals at a $75 copay. So if we look at the next slide, we again just wanted to highlight, as Holmes Murphy as a consultant is really looking for ways to better the outcomes of your individuals, ensure that there's no barriers for them getting in to see a physician, ensure that they can get their medications on a cost-effective basis. So three of the big pieces that we have in place that allow your employees to go and receive care without any barriers to cost are the fact that we do allow individuals to go and see a Baylor, Scott & White primary care physician at no cost. They can also do a telemedicine visit at no cost. And I'm sure that most folks are familiar with telemedicine visits now since COVID. However, we had put that back into place in 2019. So any individual on the plan can go through Blue Cross Blue Shield and have access to a telemedicine physician, and then that's at no cost to them. And then finally, the city has had this in place for a number of years, and we always look at it every year to make sure that the benefit is outweighing any costs or anything like that. And that is the fact that employees can fill a generic prescription medication at no cost. And we have seen tremendous utilization rates from employees in our generic prescriptions. So folks are educated, they know that benefit, and they definitely make sure that when they're going in and having a conversation with their physician, if there is a generic available, that they are taking that as opposed to a higher cost drug. So from an employee funding perspective, so how much employees pay per month for their insurance, we actually just took a snapshot of this from our open enrollment guide to show you what employees see and what employees pay. Starting on the left-hand side, you'll see those are our levels of coverage and what folks can adopt. So for example, an individual can select to have an employee only, like themselves only covered under the plan. They can choose to have themselves and their spouse, or maybe they want to have themselves and then just their children. Or finally, it is themselves and then their entire family. The next column that you see is the employee monthly rate. So that will be the same regardless of which tier of benefit they have. So they are responsible for that $35, and then the city picks up any additional cost. From a dependent perspective, that's going to be that next tier. to have a spouse on the plan, you'll see there is an additional $360.70 a month. To add children is an additional $200. And then from a family perspective, it's an additional $478.86. And then that final column is really just those two first columns totaled together. So you can see from an overall monthly payroll deduction, how much employees are paying for their health insurance. And again, this is something that we all do benchmark against as well.
Morgan, does that, the employee plus children, it doesn't matter the number of children that are on the plan?
No, sir, that's correct. So it could be one child or 10 children. There's really not a limit there.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. The other thing I did want to highlight is the rates that you see on the screen right now. Those, and I believe that most of you are aware, the city has a very robust wellness program, constantly looking for ways to engage employees in their healthcare. And one of the things that we have put into place is a voluntary wellness program. And if an individual goes in to see a primary care physician and have their annual checkup once a year, they're eligible for a premium incentive. So the amounts that you see on the screen are assuming that that individual has earned their premium incentive. For employees that choose not to, because it's absolutely voluntary, you would actually have an additional $75 included in that monthly payroll deduction, regardless of whether it's employee only, spouse, child, or family. So we will be continuing that into the next year. And again, I know we've got committees in place and we work very hard to make sure that the employees are engaged in their health care. And again, they know that it's a voluntary program, but it's there in place to help them live a healthier lifestyle.
And Morgan, just to let the council know, we have very high participation. We had 88% of the employees enrolled on the health plan meet the wellness requirement. So we have high engagement in that wellness participation.
Excellent, thank you. The next slide is really going to show from a city perspective what the city funds on an annual basis per employee. So from a city perspective, as Missy has mentioned, we haven't changed the city funding in the last couple of years. We've experienced really good medical claims trends, which I will share in a moment. But that has allowed the city to stay at that $7,697 per employee per year. And then as Janice mentioned in her prior presentation as well, that reserve fund is now fully funded as well. So from a Holmes Murphy perspective, one of the key services that we provide to the city are the actuarial services. So we sit down every year with our chief actuary, we sit down with the finance team, we sit down with the HR team and look to project where we believe medical cost and pharmacy cost will be in the upcoming fiscal year. And the way that we do that is we look at your claims over the last 5 years. And if you look at the little numbers on the bottom, you'll be like, well, Morgan, that only looks like it goes back 4 years. But each of those months below represents a rolling 12 months. And so, for example, that very first date on the bottom from March 16, that is actually pulling in the last 12 months of data looking back to March of 15. So again, this is looking at total medical claims over 5 years. And we have actually seen the city experience 0% trend, which is outstanding. I will tell you the norm medical trend that we're seeing is about 5 to 5.5%, depending on where we are in Texas. And so the yellow line, that kind of gold colored line, that's the actual performance of the city over those 5 years. And then that purple line is really that best fit curve. The numbers that you see on the side, those are what the city pays or what the city spends per employee per month for medical care. And so on average, the city had been spending $567.22 for medical care. And then recently, and a big piece of this was COVID, and then another big piece was plan design as well. But currently we are spending $507.42. So when we go to help project claims in the future, we look at this and we monitor to say, is there a reason that claims might be down? Obviously this year that would be due to COVID. And then we ask the questions, do we expect that to continue in the future? I know in past years when we've been making medical projections, we needed to build back up our reserve fund. So we took that into consideration as well. But all of these pieces go into play when we are projecting those medical costs going forward. From a pharmacy perspective, obviously, pharmacy has been trending at a much higher rate percentage-wise than medical has. A lot of that is due to the specialty pharmacy drugs that are becoming available in the marketplace. And so again, we look at that over the last 5 years. And from a city perspective, the city has a pharmacy trend of 7.4%. That's actually right in line with where we would expect it to be. Most of our cities are running between 7.1 to about 7.8%. So we're right in that middle part right there. And then when we're looking at the employee per month cost for pharmacy, you can see that on average, we spend about $226.11. And right now we're just slightly higher than that at $232.95. So again, as we're projecting that pharmacy number, we're looking and working with Blue Cross and Prime and others to say, is there something certain that's driving that pharmacy cost? What do we know that's going to be coming to the market in the future? How do we expect that that's going to impact our pharmacy spend going forward? And all of those factors, as well as that trend, go into play when we project that pharmacy number for the city. So as we looked and worked with finance and the HR team, our current projections are actually showing that there does not need to be any additional city or employee funding for the upcoming fiscal year. And then in addition to that, based on the survey results that we've seen, based on how we are seeing the claims trend, we are also recommending that the city continue with that current plan design and not make any changes for the upcoming fiscal year on 10/1.
That concludes our presentation. If y'all have any questions for us.
Any questions?
This is Holmes. I'll just weigh in. You know, City of Waco employees are such a valuable part of the community, and we want them to be happy and healthy. And so it's very important to have a good health plan like what we're discussing here today. And I was a COO at a company where we had to go over this every year, and it seemed like it was just, the cost was just exponentially getting higher every year. So I appreciate, and I'm just so pleased to see that we have experienced maybe kind of a flat year for costs and even some improvements potentially for next year cost-wise. But it looks like we're being as efficient as we can here. And I don't know if we've done a correlation. You can kind of see maybe anecdotal correlation of the wellness program and the buy-in on that in correlation to the monthly costs there. Maybe. I mean, I think that wellness program is so good to get people to buy in. That 88% is great. So let's keep encouraging that, because I think it does have its benefits. I like the idea that we're measuring this every year and we're getting feedback and reacting. And I appreciate the regular review and the great work of Holmes Murphy. No relation to me.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, ditto what Councilman Holmes said in terms of just eliciting feedback from our staff who are actually the ones utilizing our healthcare plans. That's encouraging to hear that folks are getting to access the providers that they want to continue reaching and doing so in an affordable manner. I would be curious to know from either Missy, your research, or from Morgan's, what other cities are doing at offering health insurance to their council members. I think if we're going to invest in our people, that is a group that I would love to see included in this. So curious what that looks like in some of our peer cities.
That's something definitely we can look into and get some feedback back to you on that.
And Kelly's in great shape. She would help the actuarial cost of the whole thing, no doubt.
Excellent. Any other questions or comments? Missy, Morgan, this is very informative, and it's so great to know that we're in a good position on this, and look forward to more conversation and dialogue around this. So thanks so much for your time, guys.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you all very much.
All right. Our last presentation today is going to be by Renisha Hudnall, the Interim Director of Community Services, and she'll be making the presentation remotely. Paul, I'll let you introduce anything further on that.
Council, just wanted to mention that as part of the application process for low-income housing tax credits, applicants can receive additional points in the scoring matrix if they receive resolutions of support from the city. So today, Renisha is going to be talking about some proposed projects and what their requests are. Renisha.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and Council. Can you guys see my presentation?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
Good. Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and Council. Today I will be discussing the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program and applications submitted for resolution of support. Sorry. Highlighted in this presentation is the Waco LIHTC Policy Overview, project request for support to include project details and staff's recommendation per proposed project. Recommendations moving forward, next steps, and questions. Also included in this presentation are maps that will identify the census tracts, landmarks, attractions, and businesses, as well as access to goods and services, and if the community is walkable to these resources. The criteria for a resolution of support include affordable units to market rate units, set aside units for Waco Housing Authority, architectural compatible with existing neighborhoods, community involvement through 2 public meetings, and be a taxable real estate. This slide indicates income limits based on household compositions for eligibility to reside in the proposed properties. Each property has a certain number of units set aside for income levels at 30, 50, 60, and or 80% of the AMI. For example, the max rent someone would pay if they were at 30% of the AMI for a household size of 1 would be approximately $345, including utilities. At 50% of the AMI, the person would pay roughly $575, including utilities and so forth. The first request for support is JES Development Corporation, Inc. for Page Estates. This development will be located at 826 South 11th Street. The development is proposing the construction of 54 units specifically for seniors. There will be 54 affordable units and 10 market rate units with an estimated total project cost of $12.9 million. This project will be located in a census tract greater than 40%, which requires by TDHCA program rules that this be acknowledged in the resolution of support, and the City Council authorizes development to move forward if the city chooses to support this development. Per the developer's request, in addition to the resolution of support, they are also requesting a supplemental resolution that designate their property contributing more than any other project to the revitalization efforts identified by the City of Waco. Staff is not recommending the additional resolution stating the project contributes more than any other project. Staff recommendation is based on another project requesting the same resolution to identify their project as contributing more to the city's revitalization efforts. The map moving forward will identify the location of this property, will reflect how close each project is to other proposed tax projects, and existing affordable housing complexes. Here's an example of a completed project provided by the developer. The developer is proposing a use of masonry and other materials similar to this rendering. As stated in the policy and resolution, the proposed development has to be compatible with the neighborhood. Page Estates is located within a couple of blocks of another proposed tax project. It is also located across the street from Kate Ross Complex, where the Waco Housing Authority will begin the rental assistance demonstration. It should be noted that the Community Services Department is working to develop mixed income neighborhoods. With all projects within close proximity, it will create a high concentration of affordable housing units. The second request for support is DMA Companies for 5th Street Lofts. This development will be located at 705 to 721 South 5th Street. The development is proposing the construction of 100 units specifically for families. There will be 80 affordable units and 20 market rate units with an estimated project total cost of $20.6 million. This project is also located in a census tract greater than 40%. which requires TDHCA program rules that this is acknowledged in a resolution for support through city councils. Per the developer's application, they are also requesting, in addition to the resolution of support, a supplemental resolution to designate their project as contributing more than any other project to the revitalization efforts identified in the City of Waco's Imagine Waco Plan and the Reinvestment Zone number 1. Staff is not recommending the additional resolution stating the project contributes more than any other project. Per the developer's request for support, the project design will ensure its architectural compatibility with surrounding structures and with the look and feel of downtown Waco. This will lend to the selection of building materials to street orientation and overall massing. And as stated before in the previous map, you can you notice the close proximity and location between Page Estates and 5th Street Lofts. The third request for support is Solution for Veterans for Freedom's Path at Waco. This development will be located at 4800 Memorial Drive. The development is proposing the construction and adaptive reuse of 36 units, 26 studio units, and 8 new constructed units, specifically for veterans with an estimated project cost of $5.6 million. This property would not have residents drawn from the general public. All residents will be veterans with some form of special need. Per developer, market rental units are not appropriate for this property. However, to serve the broad spectrum of veterans, the project will utilize income limits, allowing some units to be leased up to 80%. It must be noted, the developer is not committing the 15% market rate requirement. It should also be noted this project is not a taxable property and does not meet the 15% affordable unit requirements. At some point, this project may or may not be subject to property taxes as they have a long-term lease of 75 years. Per our LIHTC policy, a developer is required to have at least 15% market rate units and be a taxable real estate. Staff is requesting council to waive these 2 requirements and move forward with a resolution of support. The developer is proposing, as I stated before, the adaptive reuse of 3 existing VA structures and a new construction. He does not have the renderings yet for the new construction. So this is why I have the 3 adaptive reuse units. Freedom's Path at Waco will be located on the campus of Doris Miller VA Hospital, where they will have access to support and case management services that they will need. Our recommendations moving forward, resolution of support for each project, increase the number of affordable housing rental units in Waco, provide additional available units for seniors, veterans, and families. Each development meets criteria set forth in the policy outline, development of 3 vacant parcels of land, and the rehabilitation of 3 vacant units. It would be helpful if council could provide us some feedback in regards to the resolution of support relating to the project contributing more than any other project, as stated in the 2 applications. So our next steps would be to adopt a resolution of support, await notice of the final award from TDHCA. Projects will go through the city's development process, and then we will enter into a development agreement for fee waivers, and the construction will begin sometime in 2022. And I also wanted to add, moving forward, staff would include this process in our housing plan study to ensure we are providing the appropriate processes and affordable housing based on the needs of our residents, as well as ensure there are controls and evaluation tools in place to ensure each developer meets said project end goal. Any questions?
Awesome.
Renisha,
Thanks, Renisha. Hey, we have some public speakers on this. So if the council's good with that, or Paul and Renisha, what would y'all rather have a council discussion before we bring in the public speakers, or would y'all rather have the public speakers first?
I suggest having the public speakers first.
Preference? Is that good with you? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Esmeralda, I know we have 4. Do we have 4 public speakers on the line?
We do, and the first is Mike Ash. He is being promoted to a panelist now. Mr. Ash, are you on the line? He's Page Estates developer, and he says he's available for questions.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mayor, council members. Thank you for the time. Appreciate the presentation from Ms. Hudson and the work that the city has done in getting us to this point. I think the issue that's of most importance from our particular perspective is the issue of the resolution related to the project that contributes most or contributes more to the revitalization of this area. As we evaluate the scoring for the tax credit applications that have been submitted to TDHCA, the Freedoms Path project is going to get funded under any circumstances as a supportive housing project that's going to score significantly more points than any other project in the region. There are a number of projects then that are very close, including us in the 5th Street Lofts. I believe we're both tied with the same score at this point. Both of us need the contributes more to the revitalization of this area to be successful. Without that resolution, I believe we'll both lose a point. We'll then drop into a tie with one of the projects in Temple or Bryan and lose the tiebreaker because that project in Temple or Bryan is not in a 3rd or 4th quartile income census tract. So if the city supports this housing and wants this housing to proceed, I think you need to make a decision about which project you're going to support and really need to support one of them. Obviously, we hope it's ours, but I think that's the big issue facing the council from my perspective. I'm happy to answer any questions specifically about the project or about that issue. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Ash? Great. Thank you, Mr. Ash. We appreciate you being here today.
Thank you, Mayor.
And I believe our next caller registered to speak is Mark Gilbert.
And I don't see Mr. Gilbert on, but I do see our next speaker, Janine Sisek.
Great.
So I will promote her.
Very good.
Let me just maneuver Mr. Ash back over. Miss Sisek, are you available? Sisek?
Hi, good afternoon, Mayor, council members. My name is Janine Sisak. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Janine Sisak from DMA Development Company. I represent the developer for 5th Street Lofts. I want to echo Mr. Ash's sentiment that we request that City Council make a determination about which of the two projects is the one that most significantly contributes to the City of Waco's downtown revitalization efforts. Because if the council does not, we will lose a value, or the City of Waco will lose an investment, in our case, of $20 million to another city in the Region 8. In the Region 8 set aside under the tax credit program. I won't take much of your time, but just want to point out that DMA Development has a lot of experience developing on urban infill sites in Austin, Houston, and hopefully Waco. We've got a very well-received senior development in Hewitt, which we're very proud of. And we always try to be really transparent about what we're doing and engage on all levels to make sure all the stakeholders know who we are, know what we're planning for the site, and know that we're going to be long-term partners for cities. Most developers under the tax credit program develop, own, and hold long-term. And in our case here, we not only do we develop and own long-term, but we self-manage our properties. So we look forward to being a member of your community for the long term. Our proposed design is very urbanist. It develops a vacant site downtown into its highest and best use. Our design has a strong street edge and activates the street, and really is designed to create a pedestrian-friendly environment down there. And I do want to point out that workforce housing in your downtown area keeps working people close to jobs, which helps employers. In this case, our proposed development will also create, really stable stock of housing downtown. in an area that has a lot of, student housing as well. This is not student housing. This is permanent workforce housing in a downtown area. So I appreciate your time and consideration. I'm always available for questions and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions?
Yeah, I do. Mrs. Sack, we haven't had the pleasure of meeting. My name is Hector Sabito, and I represent the area that you're proposing your development. I've been a part of the neighborhood meetings and community meetings for Page Estates, and even for the one on the proposed development on Memorial, but haven't heard much about your project with the neighborhood. And I'm just curious to see how the neighbors, when you've had those neighborhood meetings or community meetings, how the neighbors responded to it.
Yes, thank you. Good question. We've met with, in December, actually, we met with the Downtown Waco neighborhood group via Zoom. The attendance, because it was around the holidays, I think we had 4 or 5, mostly business owners in attendance, but we gave a presentation. Everybody had questions that they asked. We answered them. We didn't hear any opposition or concern about what we were proposing. We've reached out also to a lot of nonprofits, again, in the effort to be transparent about what we were proposing downtown and get feedback from people. Mark Gilbert, who signed up to speak and is in the next room, has more information about exactly what our efforts have been. I'm happy to kind of summarize those and send them to you for your review prior to next week's meeting.
That would be wonderful. And while I appreciate the business community's voice, which is very much needed, I would also like to hear the residential voice in that area and see what they think of the addition. So I would love to see your notes if possible. Thank you so much.
We'll share. Thank you.
Janine, is Mark Gilbert registered on a different name? Because I don't see him.
Well, he was called on before me. I think he just signed up in case I had technical problems or something like that. So he was the one that really engaged with the stakeholders. So I wanted him to speak, but I think he's been now passed over as a speaker. So I guess at this point, my preference is to follow up with information. We can send it to Galen or Renisha and she can.
Well, he still gets his opportunity for these 3 minutes. I just don't see him on the Zoom, but we can go on to Mr. Until we can see where Mr. Gilbert is. Mike Meadows is on the line. I'm going to move him over. Mike, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. You have 3 minutes.
I'd like to thank the mayor and the council members for their time. I appreciate all the hard work for the city of Waco. Being a Waco native and worked here a long time, and I know your efforts are appreciated by more than just me. I'm here to speak on behalf of Mike Ash and his group. And any questions specific to their project, I would defer to Mr. Ash. But I just wanted to come on and just to let you know that I've been able to work with Mike Ash and his group for the past 2 years, if not a little bit longer than that. Last year, we went through this process on a different project. We weren't successful in obtaining the necessary tax credits for that project to come to fruition. But I just wanted to say that Mike and his group did everything they said they were going to do. They met every guideline, met every performance deadline in their contract. And I just want to let you know they do what they say they're going to do. They are a first-class group. At least that's my experience with them. And I would hope that we would see support from y'all on their project.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate you being here today. And thanks to all of our speakers for joining us, being available for questions. Okay. Any questions for Mr. Meadows? Okay. Any, Kelly or Councilmember Palmer? I know that I cut you off there because we had these speakers. Any questions for staff on this item?
Was there still one last person that was trying to speak?
Yes, I'm going to see if this
Thanks,
is
Councilmember
him.
Palmer.
Janine, is this you or is this Mike? Mark. That's Janine. I think they registered with the same name.
He also registered under my name, so if you see two Janines, but he's since figured it out, and there he is.
There he is.
Hello. Sorry about that. I didn't realize they were unique Zoom codes. Hi, I'm Mark Gilbert with DMA. Janine covered what we wanted to say about the 5th Street Lofts project, but just to respond to Councilmember Savito's questions, yes, we talked to Andy Lopez several times at the Downtown Waco Neighborhood Association. He didn't have a ton of questions about our project. Seems like that part of downtown doesn't have as much of a long-term residence other than Andy himself. So he was supportive. He thought it made sense at that site and didn't get a lot of feedback from his neighbors.
Thanks, Mark. Any questions for Mark?
Sorry, Andrea Bearfield, can you tell me what the percentage makeups are again for your property?
Yes, it is a 100 unit development with 80 units at different numbers. We have 8 units at 30% median income, 16 units at 50%, 56 at 60%, and then the residual 20 at market rate.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we really believe in robust mixed income communities, which is why we have a high percentage of market rate unit mixed with the rest of the income band.
Thanks. Thanks so much, guys. Any other questions?
Mayor, I have questions for staff.
That's great. Yeah,
okay.
That's very good. Any questions for staff?
Yes, so thank you so much, Mayor, but I don't want to cut off Councilmember Palmer because I know she's been waiting, so please, my friend, go for it.
Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. A couple of questions, Renisha. I was just prepping for my class I'm teaching tomorrow on affordable housing and the role that it plays in public policy. So this is perfect timing. I share your concern in wanting to make sure that sorry, this is Soren. He's getting his 5 minutes of fame. Share your concern in wanting to make sure that we are doing mixed income housing. The research is really compelling that we have stronger neighborhoods when we have mixed income as opposed to having concentration of affordable housing. So my question is, if we were to move forward and grant the resolution to all of the parties that are applying, what's the likelihood that all of those properties will pop up in close vicinity to one another?
So if we do award them the resolution of support, there is a possibility that they will potentially receive the tax credit. And so potentially both of them can be in the same proximity. Of course, there is a difference between each development. One is for seniors and then the other one is for family. So there will be a difference. That's the only difference. And so as we make that comment about mixed income, yes, they are stating that there will be affordable units, which is considered mixed income, but we want to make sure there's a variation between high and low incomes within that community. Previously, we've had our consolidated plan done and we've seen a disproportionate amounts and percentages between ethnic groups and housing. And so we want to ensure that we're following our consolidated plan and then also segueing that into our housing study.
Okay. My follow-up question to that is, do we have like a policy on the books that says only X number of units or X number of like affordable housing projects can be in a certain distance from one another?
Honestly, council member, I don't have that committed to memory. However, we do have analysis of impediment and I can make sure you get that. And I can also research that as well.
Thank you, ma'am.
Excellent.
Hey, Renisha, this is Hector. Just a couple of questions for you, and I have very special interest in both of these proposed developments are in my district, and the third one is right on the border of my district. Talking about the one on Memorial Boulevard, that one is going forward regardless, correct?
Correct.
If I'm not mistaken. Okay.
If it stays right in, yes,
So,
sir.
so really what staff is asking us is recommendation from either the Page Estates recommendation or the one on South Fifth, correct?
Correct. Well, so we're requesting a recommendation for the ones at Freedom Path because they have two things that they're not meeting the requirements of the policy. We're asking you guys to waive the policy so that we can write them a recommendation for that.
And for that one specifically, the policy change was that they don't want to do 15% of their units at market value, correct?
Mm-hmm. And potentially the property is not a taxable property.
Okay. Have we ever done that before with another property here in the city?
Not to my recollection, no, sir.
Okay.
Now,
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to answer your second question. I apologize. Yes. So as staff has recommended, we're not recommending you grant the supplemental solution. Resolution. However, you do have the ability to select either.
Okay.
As well to provide the resolution.
My next question is for City Attorney Ritchie. I remember Page Estates came before council a little bit over a year ago. At that time, they were proposing 32 units, whereas right now there's 64. But at that time also, they were requesting a resolution where we worded that that was going to be the most profitable development in the area. And I believe we weren't willing to do that. Have things changed in our policies or recommendations?
So Councilmember Sabito, you have a very good memory. So just to clarify, all four of these projects are requesting resolutions in support of the projects, all four of those can pass. But two of the projects, Page Estates and Renisha, give me the name of the other one. I apologize.
Fifth Street Lofts.
Fifth Street Lofts. Thank you, Renisha. Those two are requesting a second resolution, which says that that they are the best in that area. That's not the exact wording, but you get that.
Sure.
And y'all can choose not to pass one for either one of them, or you can pass that for one of them, and it gives that project the edge. So you were correct in your memory. I couldn't remember what project it was, but council last year did decline to pass the second resolution, and Renisha's shaking her head, so I assume it was for Page Estates, but I can't remember what project it was for. And y'all don't have to do the same thing you did last time. You can do something different.
Sure. Well, thank you. And that was really my question. You know, I didn't know if there was a change that has happened that we can vote differently, or, you know, if staff was still recommending that we wouldn't approve that second resolution with each project. Concerning the projects in District 2, especially in the downtown area, you know, my preference would be that we would go with one or the other. But I would honestly feel more comfortable with Page Estates only because they have made it a point, in my opinion, to meet with the neighborhood association, to set up meetings even with Cape Raw's residents that is right across the street. They made it convenient where they can meet with them after hours or on weekends even. They have received a lot of input from the community as to what they would like to see in the area. And then the other thing, I know it's a senior development, and somebody can check my statistic if I'm incorrect, but you know, just attending the Waco Housing Authority meetings over the last couple of months, the average age that is on the waiting list is 58 years old. So this could definitely apply, or definitely could benefit that demographic that are waiting to get on some type of housing. And I see it where it's so close to retail stores and job opportunities that are within walking distance, that I definitely could see that. And so I don't know too much about the 5th Street development to make a recommendation one way or the other. But I will say there are many neighbors in the downtown area that I know personally that have been in the area for many years. And while I know Mr. Lopez is an advocate and I appreciate him, but there are quite a few other neighbors in the area as well. So I would definitely encourage them, if they want to pursue this, that they would make a more conscientious effort to talk to the neighbors that are. I appreciate the business community and they're much needed, but also the residential community and voice is very important to me. So I'll be quiet.
Councilmember Sabito, today's item is on for just discussion, and so.
Sorry.
No. It's everything you said is fine, but really, we're happy to answer any questions. But really, the direction we need from y'all today is whether or not y'all want us to put the second resolutions on for each item, so that at the council meeting y'all can vote to decide which one you want to give that second resolution to.
Okay. Then before I have a discussion either way, I'm going to put him on the spot, if it's okay, City Manager Ford, and would like your input as to the recommendations or the ask that the memorial development is asking for. What are your thoughts on that and the impact that it could have in our community?
Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. My first, so y'all understand my perspective on this program, I'd love to see one of these built every year in Waco, Texas. I think we need adequate supply of workforce and affordable housing. From a policy standpoint, I'm supportive. I think resolutions of support, the basic resolutions of support don't bother me at all. I like the staff's recommendation that frankly all 3 projects would get a resolution of support. When it comes to the which project is best resolutions of support, it becomes more problematic, and I'll tell you why. And that's because we don't have complete development documents, we don't have complete architectural renderings, we don't have complete perspective to decide, in my opinion, which one is best. We're working off incomplete information, and it's not the developer's fault. It's by design. The TDHCA process lends itself to this reality. I do feel like later this year, as Galen and Rainisha finish up the housing study, we will have more information that will help us make determinations like this, because we'll know exactly how to target these resolutions, and the development community will know how to target their developments towards either 30% or 60% or seniors versus non-seniors, and it'll be based on a plan. So I think that's my perspective, Mayor Pro Tem. I really appreciate you asking, and hope that's beneficial to the rest of the team as well.
You answered exactly what I was asking, so thank you for that, sir. And I apologize for putting you on the spot. I don't like to do that, but we're in the middle of the discussion, so I just wanted to get your input on that.
Can I ask a quick clarifying question of either Bradley or Anisha? The comment that was made of, if we don't prioritize one of these and give the second resolution, then we're leaving essentially $20 million on the table that could have gone into our community. That gives me a little bit of pause. I totally hear what you're saying in wanting to have policies and procedures and a clear direction in the future. But in terms of this year, do you think it's better to push pause and not give either one of those, that second resolution piece, so we have time to more fully flesh out a plan? Or do you think we go with our best, what we think is the best choice with the limited information we have in order to have a more competitive edge on getting that $20 million?
Yeah, great question, Kelly. Councilmember Palmer, I do think it is best to just do the basic resolutions of support. One factor we haven't kind of dived into that's an additional consideration that Assistant City Manager Price has mentioned to me, I'll put him on the spot in a minute to back me up, is that, the awarding of tax credits in a census tract so close to our affordable housing units at Kate Ross could potentially impact their abilities to compete for future funding as well in the RAD program, the rental assistance program that they'll be working through in short order, actually. So I think providing a basic resolution, it could result in not seeing a project other than the Veterans Project on Memorial. It could result in that. But that gives us a year, frankly, to breathe and to get the housing study done, as well as see how that how the RAD process works at Kate Ross. And I'm going to invite Galen to provide some more educated commentary on that particular point.
Thank you, City Manager Ford. Yes, he is absolutely correct. Where having with the Housing Authority going through their RAD conversion, and Kate Ross, currently Kate Ross has almost 300 units in that property. So we're looking at potentially there's the 300 units at Kate Ross, in addition to another 64, which is geared towards seniors in Page Estates, but another 100 down at the Fifth Street Loft. So, doing the math, we're talking 465 units within a census tract that is basically half a mile from each other. And so from a long-term housing stock or our goal of mixed income housing, that may potentially cause the saturation that we may not want in that particular area as we move forward with housing opportunities. As part of our consolidated plan, we did an analysis of impediments, which talked about one of those things being having a high concentration of affordable units in certain census tracts, and the ability for us to spread that out across the city. And one of our goals that from a community services standpoint, as well as a council, just in general, is making sure we provide affordable housing opportunities throughout the city, and not just having heavy concentrations of affordable housing in certain areas. So.
I think the question that we need to answer for today is how to frame the agenda. And Jennifer, tell us what I think you might have already done this, but just one more time, tell us what the option, could we, from my vantage point right now, it's, and everyone might have made up their mind already, but I think we all kind of have some thought that we need to put into this a little bit. And so what's the broadest way that we could have this on the agenda for the council meeting?
So already on in the draft agenda are the resolutions that just support the projects. Those are already there. If council were interested in passing for either project, passing saying this is the best in the neighborhood, and that's not the exact wording,
Sure,
but you get my point. If council were interested in considering those resolutions, we would put resolutions on for each project on the agenda so you could decide which was the best.
I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but it's probably best that it be framed up in the broadest way at this point, so we can have that discussion on Tuesday, just in case people have, and I could be wrong about this, but I like having our options on the table for Tuesday, but would love to hear if other council members kind of feel like they know where they're leaning right now.
Mayor, based on the information provided by what we heard today from Rainisha, which thank you for the information that you gave, and from City Manager Ford, I am leaning to agree that a best in class decision right now would not it would not behoove us to make that kind of declaration, simply because we are still identifying and creating our plan. And what I don't want to do is get ahead of a plan. We have been doing such a good job at really looking back at where we are, what we need, and where we want to go. I think that allowing, Assistant City Manager Price and Director Hudnell to do their job and get this plan created, so that way we'll know which is more important, or not important, but which carries more weight, which is, the thing that suits the need of our community the best. Is it a senior housing? Is it mixed income? Because I just think that while I feel you, Councilmember Palmer, about do we leave this, potential money on the table? I think that we will. I think we should, because I don't think that I don't think the loss will be as great as we think it is. And I guarantee you, next year there'll be more applications. So I don't think that we lose anything in pausing right now. So that's where I'm coming from on this.
I'm with you 100%. I think in hearing the larger conversation and knowing that we really are in the midst of doing a needs assessment, really across the community, of recognizing who needs housing and where do we need it. The where piece to me feels really critical in this conversation of, like Mayor Pro Tem said, all of these housing opportunities are all really either in D2 or right outside of D2. What about the needs in North Waco? What about the needs in East Waco? What about the needs in West Waco? So I'm with you. I'm for moving forward with a resolution that does resolution 1 and not pursuing a resolution 2 in 2021 at this point.
Ditto. I'm okay with, I'm in definitely support of the first resolution, and I'm definitely okay on pausing for the second part of the second resolution. So I'm with Councilmember Barefield and Palmer on that.
Cool. Seems like we got the consensus, Bradley and Renisha. Great. Very good.
Tim, you don't have nothing? Councilmember Holmes? I was like,
I've got something. No, I just want to say, when this whole low-income housing tax credit process, when Dylan and I were rookie councilmen a long time ago, this was not the disciplined process that we have now. And I want to just thank Assistant City Manager Price and Director Hudnell for bringing this to a very objective, meaningful dialogue that we've had on this, where in the past, I think we were just kind of throwing darts. So thank you for helping us out and making it sort of a much easier process.
Yep. Agreed. Thanks, everybody. This is good. Renisha, I so appreciate your leadership. You as well, Galen. I appreciate this. So thanks, everybody, for your time today on this. Are there any other questions or comments on this item? All right, we will now move on to requests for future agenda items and our next meeting date.
Mayor and Council, the next meeting date, regularly scheduled meeting date would be March 9th, 2021 at 1:30 p.m. And I believe we've already worked towards scheduling that to be a little extra time for a potential council meeting retreat.
Great.
But more.
And Mayor, I do have a future agenda item if possible, maybe not at the March meeting, but sometime in the near future. Wanted to bring this up. I brought this up in 2020, but definitely want to talk about it again in 2021. The ability to translate our council meetings, similar to what we do with our weekly press conferences. I just think the information that we share during council meetings is so important and so beneficial. And I would love to explore opportunities about the cost and the ability to do that.
Excellent. Great. All right. Any other future agenda items? There being no further business, we'll adjourn this meeting at 3:29 p.m. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.